after the last eyewitness saw her slip beneath the surface. Titanic is the perfect unsolved murder mystery. It hit there, but then it kind of whiplashes when it hits the ground back here. What happened in the final minutes of the ship? How did it break up? How did it fall? How did it hit the bottom? Why did she sink so fast? Could more lives have been saved? Did I get the details right in the feature film?
No, I'm talking about the sinking, the way you depicted the sinking.
And we didn't do it because we didn't know. For the first time ever, I've gathered all the evidence and 8 of the world's leading Titanic experts, all together in one place. Some have been to the wreck, some approach it through the testimony, some approach it through the physical forensics.
Respectfully disagree.
No one gets out of this room until we piece together, once and for all, what happened in Titanic's final minutes. We're going to argue. I guarantee you, it'll get heated.
Coincidence, there's no coincidence.
There's no such thing as coincidence. I agree.
No.
Now, on the 100th anniversary of the tragedy, 15 years after the film's initial release, it's time for the final word on what really happened to Titanic. Here he comes, he's out. I feel like I've lived on Titanic, certainly much longer than any of the people who were actually involved in the event did. I've got it ingrained in my memory. I could walk the ship in my sleep. See the model, it just brings back to me all those nights of shooting at the crowds, running and screaming up the decks, then going back to one and doing it all again. See you in the sunshine. Comes out of my desire to explore unknown worlds. You want to see Titanic on the sonar? Check this out, bro. You're gonna love this. I wanted to dive the wreck more than I wanted to make the movie. Diving the wreck was my way into this story. There she is, baby. Dream come true for me. Titanic does not give up her secrets easily. The more you work on this, the more you can bring it into focus and fill in the gaps. And there are some enigmas. Titanic is like a fractal. The closer you get to it, the more you see completely new patterns. There have been a lot of ideas, a lot of theories. It's time to just say, this is what really happened to the best of our collective knowledge. This shouldn't be all sort of nicey-nicey, blowing pink smoke around. Let's beat it up. That's the best way to arrive at an answer that makes sense. My Titanic dream team includes Ken Marshall, artist, visual historian, P.H. Nargelet, explorer, underwater operations, RMS Titanic, Bill Sauter, historian, director of research, RMS Titanic, Mark Stevenson, naval systems engineer, Don Lynch, chief historian of the Titanic Historical Society, Dave Gallo, director of special projects at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, Commander Jeffrey Stetler, naval architect, U.S. Naval Academy, Brian Thomas, Coast Guard naval architect and salvage engineer. We have the team and the tools. From hundreds of hours of my expedition dive footage to deck plans and survivor testimony, we're going to take all we learned and create a new visualization of the sinking. From iceberg to bottom, has never been animated so precisely and so dramatically. We're determined, once and for all, to learn what happened after Titanic disappeared beneath the surface 100 years ago. It's a good, just kind of drive a stake in the ground moment for us to say, let's get the history right. To me, the exercise of making the movie and preparing to make the movie was about understanding history. Like, what is history? History is this kind of consensus hallucination.
There's some people who they tell the story like it happened yesterday, and then there are others who over the years have been telling the story and the story changes,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And how much does the telling of the story become the memory as opposed to the memory itself? Our task here is to separate perception from truth. So what is it that we know for sure? At the time of her construction, Titanic was the largest ship ever built. 269 meters long, and standing nearly 20 stories high. Her weight was over 46,000 tons. Her hull spanned 4 city blocks. She had 9 decks encompassing 370 first-class cabins, 168 second-class cabins, and 297 third-class cabins. Accommodations for up to 3,547 people. Mechanically, she was a state-of-the-art, fitted with 29 boilers, 159 furnaces. Each of her steam engines was the size of a 3-story house. Over 6,000 tons of coal filled her coal bunkers. From her innovative double-bottomed keel to her 16 watertight compartments, Titanic was considered unsinkable. Each compartment had doors that were designed to close automatically if the water level rose above a certain height. Titanic would be able to stay afloat if any 2 compartments or the first 4 became flooded. According to her builders, even in the worst possible accident at sea, Titanic was virtually unsinkable.
Iceberg, right ahead!
Thank you. But we know that on April 14th, 1912, Titanic sideswiped an iceberg and sank in 2 hours and 40 minutes. This is what's left of Titanic, a tangled wreck on the ocean floor, thousands of broken pieces. But from her rust-covered remains, we may still be able to figure out what happened in her last moments. Well, it's very important to find out where all the objects wound up. And then you can work backwards from that to sort of reconstruct how the processes got started. You gotta peel away the bottom impact. You gotta understand what happened in the water column. You gotta understand what happened at the surface. Then maybe you can work your way back to what actually set off the sinking in the first place. It's like a murder mystery case where some piece of evidence is an outlier. Everything fits perfectly, but there's one outlying piece of evidence and it seems so trivial, and yet it unwinds everything else. It's a great forensic process to go through. It's the same thing that they do in an NTSB analysis of a crash site for an airliner. Now, how did that engine get way over there? How did that wind up 2 miles back? You can't really piece together what happened until you can account for every single piece and where it got there. 640 kilometers off the coast of Newfoundland, and more than 3 kilometers beneath the surface of the North Atlantic, lies Titanic. The wreck site spans 1.5 kilometers of the seafloor and is anything but accessible. It takes about 2.5 hours to descend in a submersible. Daylight doesn't reach this depth. It's eternal darkness. Here we find the bow and stern sections 600 meters apart. We find the ship's boilers clustered east of the stern, cargo cranes sheared from the deck, broken pieces of funnel, ground up shell plating, sections of the ship's keel were double bottom, rudders and propellers pinned in the sediment intact, an open shell door at knee deck. There are serving plates, teacups, shoes, countless personal artifacts. These are all clues in the mystery. What caused this magnitude of destruction? How can we begin to make sense of it? So it's good to wrap our heads around this. So now you start looking at a debris field map.
It's part of that crime scene recreation of seeing everything on this macro level. We can get down to individual images of each individual piece, but you need the context of it. You need to keep that forest in sight. You have to have that map of the wreck site to do any meaningful forensics.
Titanic's bow and stern are torn in two and lie apart, like a crime scene where the body and head are on opposite sides of the room. You can see it. You can see it on the debris field map here. It's a very interesting thing. Bow points north and it's partly dug into the sediment. Its open end is ragged. It's not a clean break. At first glance, it appears the farthest object north, but there's the number 1 cargo hatch, and that's 80 meters forward of the bow. And the hatch bolts are all severed. So what did that? And how did the bow break from the stern? What did this? The stern points south, facing the opposite direction of the bow. It looks like a bomb hit it. To the east of the stern lie 5 boilers from Boiler Room 1, the midsection of the ship. I think the location of these boilers is our first lead. If you just draw a circle around those 5 boilers, and you take the center of that circle, I think that's where the ship broke up at the surface.
Right.
Okay, these 5 boilers help us to find the hypocenter, the ground zero for the disaster. The hypocenter, directly underneath where the breakup took place on the bottom, would be where the heaviest and most uniform objects would be clustered. And with it, we can extrapolate the journey taken by each part of the ship from the surface to where we find them today on the bottom. And then you have a kind of fallout pattern, downwind, if you will, or down current for very light objects like teacups and light debris and coal, the coal being spread the farthest because it's the least heavy in water. We could account for many objects in our debris field map and explain how they traveled from the breakup at the surface to end their life 4 kilometers down at the bottom. But not every part can be so easily explained.
Something that just occurred to me for the first time in all these years is, if that happened way up there, isn't it interesting that we've got, these would be your poop deck cranes, and they're this close to their original location.
The stern cranes, sort of grouped together and lying adjacent to the stern, was a little mystery that we had to solve. And in solving that mystery, it would shed some light on what actually happened to the stern when it hit the bottom of the ocean. Because why were those cranes there? Where did they come from?
Odd, isn't it?
Then the question is, what held the cranes with all this as opposed to them just scattering?
I don't know. I'm inclined to think these came apart at a higher altitude. I think that it's just coincidence that they happen to wind up.
Coincidence?
I don't believe there's no such thing as coincidence. I agree. I'm going to jump to the crazy part of this.
Yeah.
All right, which is these 2 double bottom sections and this big chunk.
There are 3 pieces of the wreck whose placement on the debris field map don't make sense. They're outliers. strangely out to the east of the hypocenter. We know from a past expedition that these two, out of the three, are pieces of Titanic's double bottom. We know these parts are from the same section of keel because their ragged ends align like two pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. How did these two chunks of keel detach from the bottom of the ship and end up to the east of the hypocenter? And what about the third outlier?
Now, I'm just trying to account for something that I don't understand, which is this thing. This is just a big pile of junk.
Big, ugly pile.
Big, dirty pile of junk.
Nobody had ever seen it before. It's way off to the east. It's beyond these double bottom pieces.
Okay, so the mystery piece, the enigma piece is this.
Is this, yes. About the upper couple decks of that.
It's even bigger and larger and heavier than the boilers, yet it ended up way far out there.
How did this chunk, from beneath the third funnel deck house, end up way out there?
All right, well, why don't we stick to what we think we know, fill in the rest of the picture.
To fill in the rest of the picture and visualize Titanic's final moments, we need to go underwater and take a closer look at the damage. I see the wreck. I see it.
Mirror 2, this is mirror 1. Depth is 3,000. 3, 5, 3 meters.
I love this stuff. Exploration. Real honest-to-God deep ocean exploration. To me, it's an alternative to making movies, which is as technically challenging, as emotionally challenging, and it's something that I can use my skills as a filmmaker. It's about creating the technology. It's about the personal challenge of actually going into this hostile environment, doing things right, doing things safely, and coming back with results.
Say goodbye to the surface orbit.
I've been a wreck diver for many years at scuba depths. I love shipwrecks. I love the romance and the mystery of shipwrecks. And the Titanic's the ultimate wreck. It's the Everest of shipwrecks. And I said, let's do a real expedition to the Titanic to shoot scenes for the movie. And this was all new territory. Nobody had ever really done this before. But looking into the darkness here and wondering what was beyond, what's down there, is what led me to want to go back and explore it thoroughly with new technology. So of course, as soon as the movie was done, I was immediately planning my next expedition.
Okay, dive 1. It's going to be JB and Bill in mirror 2, and Ian Vince in mirror 1.
Come in here, explore these rooms.
Up until our 2001 expedition, no one had attempted an extensive survey of the interior of the wreck. So when we went back for the 3D documentary Ghosts of the Abyss, we developed remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, we called them bots, built to withstand the incredible pressure at that depth. They could maneuver through small holes in the wreckage and explore up to 600 meters from the manned sub. Previous ROVs had been leashed to the sub by a short, bulky tether. Our state-of-the-art mini ROVs, affectionately nicknamed Jake and Elwood, had an onboard power supply and just needed a spool of air-thin fiber optic cable to receive directions and send a live video feed back to my sub. As I guided them through the wreck, they unwound this cable behind them like Theseus unwinding the ball of twine as he explored the labyrinth. This made it possible for the first time to film interior areas of the wreck that hadn't been seen since the night Titanic sank.
The bots are finally going to Titanic. 3 years in the making. See you on the bottom.
Since my first expedition, I've gone back twice. Floating anchors. Light, air power. Alright, we're ready to fly. Oh, it's coming out. Pretty cool. Looking good, Elwood. Time to
center of the grand staircase.
I've shot hundreds of hours of archaeological survey footage inside the wreck. Now there where I want it to be. Those are the lead stained glass windows. Look at that. Unbelievable. And another thing that's absolutely fascinating is this idea of telepresence. When you fly an ROV, after the first few minutes, and really for subsequent hours at a time, you completely forget your physical human existence.
What's going on?
And you become that vehicle. It's almost like you can feel what it's feeling.
This is what you get when you get the lighting in the right place. You get a good sense of the depth of the space. And that's right in front of the elevators, I believe. It's a well-preserved brass bed here.
And I'd be in the other sub outside,
Right.
navigating.
I think on this one you were.
Yeah, we could see Jim inside. Every now and then you could see the little light in there, and you knew it was, okay, Jenny, we need to move a little bit farther aft because it's just all right. And he backs it up and moves back, and then you got to get in the current just right. And then, okay, Jim, we're coming, but we're kind of caught in current here. And then we do a pass, and Jim, how did that look? And there'd be a pause, and love it, love it, love it. Do it again.
Yeah, do it
Something
again.
like that.
Yeah, so they're maneuvering 18 tons out there to get one light through a porthole.
I made 33 dives to Titanic. Laying eyes on the site is one of the most important forensic tools. The power of observation. Some of the damage is self-evident, easy to understand. Other aspects are baffling. Like cops at a crime scene, we're inventorying all the evidence. Now we can begin to rewind the clock and start to put these pieces back together. To tell the story of Titanic's final moments, you've got to get to the night the ship hit the bottom. And what happened when it hit the bottom? Then you've got to be able to separate out all the bottom impact damage from what might have happened as it descended through the water column. It's important to know that things that people have identified as possibly iceberg damage probably aren't. A good example of this is the so-called big opening, a hole blasted in the starboard side of Titanic's bow. We now know it isn't iceberg damage, but how do we explain it and the other destruction to the bow?
We thought about this a lot when we animated it. Take me a second to find it here.
Okay, we made this in '95 for the movie, and I still think it's a useful reference for the bow's impact, even though some of the other details aren't right.
This is arrival. There's the initial deformation, which actually puts the forward well deck in compression, probably buckled in compression at that point. And that's the point at which the big opening starts, because it's actually getting exercised in two directions. And then the back end now is falling down and is hitting and compressing.
Is that the cover I saw flying, the hatch cover flying off there? Is that
Right, exactly. We animated that. The hatch is the farthest piece of the ship from the breakup. How did this thing get out there?
Jim, those forces to snap bolts, I mean, that's something I can't get my mind around at
All right, so either at the moment of initial impact or at the moment that the ship slams down, the hydraulic forces inside the ship are enough to blow this hatch up. So you've got some internal overpressure here that's hydraulic, and over the large area of that number one hatch, it just breaks every bolt at the same time. The hatch doesn't peel off sequentially, it's an evenly distributed overpressure, it just breaks every bolt head simultaneously.
For hydraulic outburst accounts for the mysterious placement of the number 1 hatch. The damage we see to the bow is more extensive than simply the force of impact at the bottom. What could have possibly happened if the bow plummeted 4 kilometers down to the ocean floor?
She hits the berg on the starboard side, right? She kind of bumps along, punching holes like Morse code.
In a scene from the movie Titanic, we used animation to illustrate for Rose's character what we thought had happened as the ship sank.
So now as the bow goes down, the stern rises up.
Since then, we've come a long way in our CG modeling and 3D animation, but most importantly, in our understanding of the disaster.
So what happens? She splits, right down to the keel. The bow section planes away, landing about a half a mile away, going 20-30 knots when it hits the ocean floor. Pretty cool, huh?
Thank you for that fine forensic analysis, Mr. Bodine. Of course, the experience of it was somewhat different.
Okay, this 95 animation tells a good story, but some of the forensic details aren't quite right, so with what we're learning now in our current investigation, we're going to get to update this.
And it's pulling the whole ship down. Before it now breaks, there's a relaxation. It's pulling it down, rips away, and then natural flooding.
This is a big deal for me. I wanted to do this for a long time. A detailed and thoroughly accurate visualization of Titanic sinking does not exist. Working with animator Casey Schatz and Naval Systems Engineer Park Stevenson by remote, I'm going to improve what we did 15 years ago.
This looks great. This is the sum total of everything that you and Parks have been working on over the last few weeks.
Yep.
I think it looks awesome. All right, let's go to the bow section. It's nice when you see it in scale like this, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, totally.
It just makes sense. When you see it in scale, it all makes sense. And this is accurate. The ship is to scale to the
Absolutely.
To the water color,
I've been OCD about everything.
Okay. I'm not shocked by that. See, that's it, man. That's exactly the way I always pictured it. So the stern is actually only a few lengths behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was surprising, but it follows down fairly closely.
Yeah, see, everybody always talks about how it's planing forward. Yeah, it's planing forward, but if you looked at this, you'd just say it was falling. Yes, it's planing forward, and that accounts for its displacement. But it's 1 forward and 6 down, so it's basically just falling. It dives and stalls, and when it stalls, it moves forward.
Sure.
And then it dives and goes down, and then it stalls and moves forward.
We can't complete our update of the animation until we answer some more questions. Let's keep working backwards from the wreck. We've analyzed the force of impact with the bottom, but that doesn't explain all the observable damage. What could have possibly happened as the bow plummeted 2.5 miles down to the ocean floor?
To me, one of the fun parts of this is looking at what happened to the bow right when it departed the surface, and looking at the evidence for that high flow rate, that high longitudinal flow rate.
Weighing at least 20,000 tons, Titanic's bow tore away from the stern and plunged downward at a speed of 40 to 50 kilometers per hour. This is the forward well deck of Titanic, and you can see there that kind of tubular object is the mast. See the mast? Here, we're up on the top of the deck house right now, I think, aren't we? Yes. Oh, yes. Right on this. This is good. This is good.
Do we have any pictures of that area handy? Maybe one of Ken's paintings is a better jumping off point.
Yeah, that's the wreck section there.
Ken feels very connected to Titanic And quite honestly, the movie was pitched using his paintings. I just opened up the big double truck spread of his glorious painting of the ship going down with its lights blazing and the rockets being fired off, showed it to the studio executives and said, "This ship, Romeo and Juliet." And that's it. It was probably the shortest pitch relative to the amount of money it raised in history of movies.
Well, yeah, you can actually see it pretty well in this painting. This is a good image. Let's keep this image up. Oh, so let's see what we've got. We've got a mast that's knocked aft. So what force knocked the mast aft and then kept it there, even though the ship hit the bottom with a slight forward vector? All of the B-deck forward-facing windows, broken, and that one's broken. So, to me, that all adds up to a very strong longitudinal flow over the ship, sufficient not only to break the mast, but to get that mast into position and then allow it to shelter these windows from a peak hydrodynamic pressure, which subsequently broke those windows.
And that when the bow broke away and started speeding up, that's also what tore the crane off, and the jib on this crane went down behind it there. Where we find the mast today on the wreck is clearly a result of the bow section breaking away from the stern. And diving toward the bottom. And that initial speed, which could have gotten up to as high as maybe 40 knots or something like that, that pressure of seawater pushing back, it's too much for the mast. It just bent back and probably bashed around a little bit for a few seconds, destroyed the wheelhouse, which was made of wood, and ended up right in that position.
Hydrodynamic flow, or the force of the racing water, caused considerable damage.
So this was our attempt to show the mast doing that
In the 95 animation.
So here's the mast coming back. That's the wheelhouse. Wheelhouse starts to peel off. Mast is kind of bouncing around in that area. And then the wheelhouse disintegrates in the flow. And I think it was more dramatic than that. I think it was like a house in a hurricane. I think it went in one. You know how when the house will start to lift, and then there's a moment where it just goes because it gets too much of an angle of attack. I don't think it just peeled away like that. I think it kind of
Okay, we'll make sure to get this right when I update the animation. But for now, the hydrodynamic flow can't explain all of this damage.
This deckhouse wall is pushed outward. Same on the other side. Pushed outward. Why just that? Why not all of it? This roof is mushroomed down, or pancaked down with extreme force. And the top of the gymnasium is bent down. The windows are all bent. That's not sag. It was buckled down.
The roof was found to be sagged in with a few pieces of funnel shell on that side.
Right.
What caused this damage? Are we missing something? So you've got this big wreck coming down through the water column, and it's pulling water down with it, and it's been moving for miles, literally at 25 miles an hour, pulling along this wake behind it, just like the wake behind a race car that another race car can get into and kind of draft. So there's all this moving water, big column of water. Ship hits the bottom, stops suddenly. The column of water does not stop. It comes down on top of the ship, pancakes down the roof, crushes down the decks, and then spreads out across the seafloor. So it actually winds up moving kind of horizontally and blowing objects away from the ship.
Do we have any data on the magnitude of the downblast? I mean, the hydro guy in me says that it can't be all that huge. You know, we're talking about buckling and deforming in a big way, at least moderate-sized structural members. And the total mass of water can't be any much more than the mass of the ship.
Downblast is enormous. It's huge loading per square inch.
I professionally disagree with that statement.
It can't be momentum of the deck mushrooming and then plastically deforming and remaining there in permanent set.
Plastically deforming from
so the deck is
just
falling,
from inertia?
falling, stopping. There's nothing supporting the middle of the deck. It just...
Yeah, it's got water underneath it that needs to be compressed out of the way for it to deform.
What it does is, as it squashes the ship, it increases pressure on the water inside the ship, which can't be compressed like air. So it has a hydraulic effect, just like the fluid in a hydraulic cylinder, and it tends to blow things out the side.
So this thing stops cold, and you've got 50,000 tons of water moving above it at still 30 miles an hour. That's 30 knots coming down, or whatever its sinking speed was, which is the equivalent of the flow here that broke the mast and broke all these windows and peeled off the davits and did all that.
They like to say that the steel doesn't lie, but I think I'd revise that. I'd say that the steel probably tells more complicated stories than we can tell from how it's lying on the bottom of the ocean.
There's two different energies going here.
Yeah.
Number one, you had it took off, did this high flow past, weakened a lot of these structures up here. Then it hit, and those weakened structures, which were moving with the ship, all of a sudden they do this, and then on top of this, then you have your downblast. So it's a combined effect.
Oh, sure, it's definitely combined. I mean, I think that the steel and the water are kind of flowing together.
I agree with Parks on that, absolutely. But there's one curious detail that baffles me. All the windows of the officers' quarters on the boat deck are open. The air was freezing that night. They wouldn't have opened them. So who or what opened those heavy latched windows?
So the interesting thing is, why are these windows all open and forward?
Yeah, that is
well, when
the very front
No,
window.
but why are they unlatched?
Why are they unlatched?
Well, unlatched is a different deal.
It's downblast.
You know why they're forward.
It's
They didn't just
downblast.
say that.
It's the overhead just getting enough of a compression because this is right under it.
Right. So
And all those windows.
yeah. So they just blew open.
But why wouldn't it just break the glass? Why would it
Well,
unhinge solid brass hinges
One after
and
another.
latches?
Keep in mind, there's two ways to latch this window. There's a day latch, which is done from the casement, like we would all think of.
yeah,
And then there is a storm.
which is this thing.
Yeah, that's an eccentric. You close the window, you turn the crank, the eccentric shifts, and it pins that window in place.
That's not latched. So there's a day latch that's actuated from the inside, right?
Right.
If that handle weighed more than the latching side, when the ship flopped down to the bottom, all those handles flipped open.
No, I think what happened. No, I think what happened is the spindle that goes in probably just failed from tension. A lot of times, people will look at a device from the Victorian period and go, "Well, what's this for?" And they make up an answer, and unfortunately, it's the wrong answer because our understanding of machinery is different from the ones at the time.
Okay.
Because it's a fairly large area, and it's at the end of the fulcrum.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Sure, it just blew them open.
Yeah.
It's not meant
That didn't break the
And
glass.
that was weaker than the glass.
Didn't break the glass.
Yeah.
Bill Sauter very modestly says he knows the ship better than the builders, and I actually believe he does. He's the curator of an enormous collection of Titanic artifacts. He has more day-to-day contact with the physical remains of the ship than anyone.
The one thing I'll remember about Titanic artifacts to the day I die is when the Safeld perfume vials came up. When you recover stuff from the Titanic, it's wet, it's rusty, and it's rotten. And the smell that comes off it is perfectly alien, perfectly fetid. You know it's a kind of death you have never experienced. And so the lab is kind of unpleasant. And then all of a sudden somebody opens up this satchel, this leather satchel, and out comes the fragrance of heaven. It's all these flowers and fruity flavors, and it's delicious. It's the most wonderful thing you've ever had. It was just a complete, overwhelming experience. It was like all of a sudden the fragrance of heaven kind of goes through the room. So instead of being surrounded by all of these dead things, for those few minutes, the ship was alive again.
Okay, we're filling in the picture from the flow to the impact of the downblast. I understand the damage to Titanic's bow, but the stern is a completely different story. It's shattered beyond recognition, like it was hit by a bomb. We're going to figure out why.
Well, my name is Ken Marshall. I've been studying the Titanic for over 3 decades now.
I called Ken Marshall to this investigation because he knows the wreck site better than anyone. And he's created these remarkable paintings that stand even today as a definitive guide to Titanic in life and in death.
After 30 years of studying the ship so intently and painting the ship so many times, 100 times, see this thing in 3 dimensions of me standing here, I am absolutely speechless.
I've been painting Titanic since the late 1960s. 1967 actually was my first painting.
Ken has a keen visual memory and the talent to composite hundreds of separate images into these big picture mosaics. He's especially valuable with the internal archaeological survey that we did with the robotics because he can actually look at something and identify it.
There will be big brass letters that will say A deck, B deck, C deck, or D deck. The first thing you see when you come out of the elevator.
And there it is. Bingo, baby. Bingo. Tell him bingo.
With my paintbrush, I've been spending truly my adult lifetime, I feel, subconsciously, trying to bring all those souls back to life in a weird way, to honor their memory, to keep it alive in people's memory. The ship and the people. When Bob Ballard's expedition with the French found the wreck in 1985, the first images confirmed that the ship had broken apart. But it was impossible to see the entire wreck in one shot. So Ballard's publisher enlisted me to paint composites, big picture views of the ship created from studying hundreds of close-ups. And that was my first exposure to the wreck, other than the few pictures I had seen on, in magazines or in the news. Seeing all of this imagery for the first time, Bob sitting me up in a room downstairs right below his lab, thousands of feet of individual stills, and I had to crank through this film, and I was doing sketching, and I was pinpointing particular images that I needed enlargements of and duplicates of in order to do these paintings. I thought we would find her and she'd still be in relatively good condition and still would look more like the ship, and instead she was just nuked, just blasted apart. It was like going to an autopsy. It was quite a rude awakening. After 3 days of that, I broke down in tears one night. I remember I called home, spoke to speak to a friend, and I remember saying words to the, it kind of makes me tear up right now to think about it, but I said to him, my ship, it's gone. It was so destroyed. And I knew the ship was in 2 pieces, but to see these close-up images and the high resolution of some of them, and to look down and see how completely ripped apart the ship was, I know it as I would a brother, a sister, a mother, a father. And there she was in a million pieces, dead.
Some of the damage is easy to understand. Other aspects are downright mysterious. Like the stern. It's completely bizarre at first sight. It's like a bomb overhead. When I dived it was remarkable to see the extent of the damage. The rudder and the enormous propellers pinned in the sediment are hauntingly intact. Surrounding the stern is a large concentration of mangled debris. It really looks like a plane crash.
Well, how do we know that the stern took off toward the bottom going pretty fast? It's the poop deck.
So the aftmost deck, the poop deck, is doubled over completely. 1 centimeter steel folded like a taco. How did this happen?
It's got a big electric crane sitting here that's got a lot of sail area, across on that axis, right? So take off toward the bottom, you got a really powerful hydrodynamic loading here. So you got a big sort of prying moment right here, all right? And it just rips this deck up, which then catches lift, peels back and flops over double and winds up like that.
And you think that happened in the first 500 feet,
First 30 seconds. Now, you might have had some implosions in here, loosening rivets, bang, bang. The stern left the surface in a very different configuration. It had all its broken parts faced into the current, and I think it just blew off, all pretty close to the surface. And if something held on, it might have been packed up against the face of it or flat back against the underside, and it took a while for that to exercise loose. All the loose stuff had already been blown off.
He's proposing that the stern fell leading edge first, and that it was water passage into and around that damage area that sort of peeled off and exfoliated basically the first third of the stern.
We didn't get this right in the 95 animation, but we're going to nail it now.
I think the point you're making is it's not like that DD one where it was just
coming off in regular...
Yeah,
right.
Copy.
So all the stuff has come off the ship.
Yeah.
Pretty much by the time the ship is probably 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through that end swap. So it's quick. So that's happening now. So stuff's coming off, and boom, decking is coming off, and now it's all off.
Yeah. Oh, it is fast. Wow. Yeah.
If you stick your hand out the window of a moving car with a deck of playing cards, if you turn it this way, you can hold on to it. Mm-hmm. And that's what the bow was.
Yeah.
You turn it that way, they're all gone. They'll all split apart and blow backwards, because the second their angle of attack increases to a few degrees, then it increases rapidly. Once it's at 90 degrees, there's no holding on to it, and it's gone. It all happens instantaneously. And at the moment that happens, when those cards blow like that, there's a much stronger back force on your hand.
Yeah.
Try it sometime.
Yeah. I will.
You might get busted for littering.
Exactly.
Feels great to have a second chance to get this stuff right. In the 95 animation, the stern didn't spiral, but we now know that it did.
Because I think that when the stern hit the ground, it did not hit straight down. I think it slid.
Oh, definitely, because its back is broken. It's not. It's the axis of this part of it. Rudder's pinned in the sediment perfectly, and the props are pinned in the sediment perfectly, and that's the anchor, and then it comes down.
Okay.
Which actually sort of makes sense, because it sort of peeled off all this stuff over here and blew that side out flat.
Yes, that's true.
Now let's turn to what we don't know. The three outliers. We haven't yet explained them, and until we do, we won't know exactly what happened to the ship as she vanished beneath the surface 100 years ago. One of the more unique challenges to studying the wreck is trying to
see past what 100 years of sitting at the bottom of the ocean has done to the steel. Titanic is not rusting in the way that we would think of rusting. It's actually being eaten by bacteria, and the bodies of these bacteria form these amazing structures called rusticles. They look like stalactites, and they're actually formed in a kind of similar way, in that, stalactites are a deposition of minerals created by gravity. This is actually the deposition of dead bacteria that have iron inside their bodies that they've absorbed from the ship, and they just kind of form these structures. They're actually organic. I think the rusticles are now part of this amazing monument at the bottom of the ocean. Okay, tell me, move ahead slow.
Move ahead slow.
Part of what's fascinating for me is that it's this onion skin process. You have to peel away the layers of the damage, working in reverse order from what you're seeing right now in the present. Now we're looking at Titanic from 100 years later. So you've got the deterioration at the seafloor, on top of the bottom impact, on top of, the descent, and then the breakup at the surface. Once we apply our forensic process, Titanic's remains in the debris field begin to tell the story of what happened on that night, April 14th, 1912. So far, our theory of how the wreck traveled through the water column and what happened at impact fits the evidence, except for three outliers. Out of these two pieces of double bottom and a pile of deckhouse debris from beneath the third funnel end up far from the rest of the wreck.
Well, two double bottom sections are wing shaped, so...
These are wings.
Yeah.
These are 747 wings.
Yeah.
They both happen to land within a fairly narrow cone of each other, so it's likely they were attached to each other and separated at some point in the water column and then fell separately.
I agree. They had a weakened area that kept them together for a certain period. When you're sitting at a table of experts and you start whittling away at what's real and what's not real, and you end up with real mysteries that are solvable, the answers are there. The clues are at the bottom of the ocean.
So if they're coming down through the water, kind of like that.
Right.
And then finally it just exercises it so much it breaks apart, whatever that last connection was.
Right.
It would look something like this. The pieces of double bottom keel begin life together, and on the journey down, exercised apart, planing away like an aircraft wing to where we find them today, out in the debris field. All right, so that accounts for that.
Right.
That's not a planing shape.
It's not.
This is just a big pile of junk.
It's a big, ugly pile.
Big, dirty pile of junk that would not have any strong tendency to plane in any one direction.
And it's a big, lumpy shape. It's just a pile of crap on the ocean floor right now. It has no aerodynamic qualities. It has the same aerodynamic qualities as one of the boilers. It's even bigger and larger and heavier than the boilers, yet it ended up way far out there. So how did it get way over there?
Well, look, I think one of the big problems we have is that we're thinking way over there, when really, detaching from this point, it's way over there.
Okay.
We're not getting the vertical scale.
Understood.
Right, so if something detaches here and frisbees off, it's only going that far.
Jim threw out a couple of quick ideas about it being attached to the stern and the stern spiraling down, and maybe it flung it off over there. But the problem with that is there was a chunk of the ship between that chunk and the stern. And that didn't get thrown out there. We don't have very good imagery of it. We're going to need better imagery of it to try and understand it more and see if there's clues in there that will help us understand why it ended up out there so far.
Although there are still mysteries, we've learned enough to rewind the clock farther on the night of April 14th, 1912, to the moment Titanic lost her fight to stay afloat and broke in two. Let's take a look at the results of a 2.5-year study by naval architects to see if we can pinpoint where Titanic split and exactly how. We've peeled away the layers to reconstruct the story of the forces that hammered Titanic as she plummeted and hit bottom. Now it's time to look at the breakup at the surface. How did an unsinkable ship, the world's greatest technological marvel at the time, break in two? If the wreck site is a crime scene, the breakup was her last breath. In the days that followed the disaster, the U.S. Senate hearing and the British Board of Trade inquiry recorded contradictory eyewitness testimony about the breakup. Some saw her break in two. Others swore she went down whole. The British Board of Trade concluded that Titanic sank intact. Not until 1985, when explorer Bob Ballard's co-expedition with the French found the wreck, did we have proof once and for all that Titanic broke apart.
Dr. Bauer, take questions now if you have any.
How do you account for the fact that the bow and the stern are at opposite ends of the species?
Well, we found boilers there, major pieces of stern, and that separated by 800 meters. I don't know. And again, I'm sure that 30%, if not more, of what I'm telling you right now, I will try to eat in a few weeks when I finally get a chance to look at my data.
I'm kind of embarrassed that somebody in the 70s or the 80s didn't put forward the breakup. You know, when you read the many accounts, it says like
all spelled out.
Vast amounts of cork were found. Well, that's what they used to insulate the uptakes.
Yeah.
You know, the Pan's wood. It's a piece of wood from the lounge. As a matter of fact, you use it in the movie. I think Leo Rose is on and Leo says goodbye.
Right.
You know, well, if the lounge is gone and there's woodwork from other parts of the ship, clearly there's no middle part of the ship anymore.
Right.
Why didn't the light bulb go off in anybody's head?
Because the wreck hadn't been found yet, and so there wasn't as much worldwide interest, and so there weren't groups of people like ourselves focusing on this as much as we are now.
Well, and then there's that institutionalized myth. There were survivors who said it broke, and they tried to tell the story, and they were shouted down by experts who insisted over the years that no, it couldn't have broken. You're mistaken.
But this is the fun part of history.
Yeah.
Because everybody wanted to think of Titanic as this majestic, they wanted to romanticize it. We wanted it to sink as this beautiful icon that just passed away into another world.
And be sitting on the bottom.
And is sitting on the bottom in some ghostly perfect way.
Ruth Blanchard said, people say that I'm wrong and that I didn't see right and that the ship didn't really break in two, but I was only 12. But I saw it, and we were all talking about it in the lifeboat. Did you see that? The ship broke in two. One part went this way, and the rest went back that. Now, they can't all be having this hallucination.
We heard a terrible explosion. And as all of you know, the Titanic had 4 funnels. And when we heard this explosion, the Titanic broke in half.
I remember at one of our conventions when Ruth Blanchard talked about the ship breaking in two, and this was before they found the ship, and one of the officers of the society grabbed the microphone and explained how it was just her perception because the funnel had fallen. And in hindsight, I wish she had taken the microphone back and said, "Were you there?"
I called Don Lynch to this investigation for his insight into the experience of the Titanic survivors. He spent his entire career gathering their stories. Many of the survivors were his close personal friends.
Well, when I first joined the Titanic Historical Society in 1974, and I realized nobody had made an effort to find them, and so I started tracking them down.
I got to know a number of them, got to know some of them fairly well. And so the story of the Titanic is in the survivors. That's how we know what happened. And people sort of ignored that all those years. There was always this fascination with the ship and the shipwreck, and they didn't feel we could learn more from the survivors.
The question is, what does seeing it break mean? Does it mean seeing the ship suddenly move associated with a loud noise?
No, they see an actual clean break.
Okay. So, and do we know where the clean break is? Right here.
That's where the clean break is, and this is based on the wreck.
You're saying based on
observations of the wreck.
Well, it should be actually at the promenade deck. It should be towards the top of the promenade deck, or just at the bottom of the boat deck, midway between the second and third funnels.
Here.
There you go.
Oh, so that's right.
Just about right.
The 95 animation gets this detail wrong. It shows the clean break just behind the third funnel, and we now know that it broke in front of it. Okay, I'm going to fix this in the new animation. So, we know where she broke. The question now is, how?
It all comes back to, did it detach in the vertical position, and what does that mean to what subsequently happened to the stern? Because the stern is where all the people were.
Right.
And there's so many conflicting accounts of the stern being vertical but not vertical. Kind of also, how wrong was the movie? That's kind of important to me as well, But I think we were right about the idea that the bow swung down once the stress was, or once the forces were released and it broke, swung down. And took off for the bottom with a high rate.
Right. So one thing is very strong enough to hold the bow attached to the stern.
Double bottom.
Double bottom.
Double bottom's holding it together.
Titanic was constructed with a double bottom, which in theory made the ship's underside more resistant to damage and flooding. Could this innovation have delayed Titanic's breakup and bought time, maybe only minutes, to save additional lives? Did a piece of the double bottom hold the bow and stern together to the very last moment?
We've all been thinking this is the classic break the sword over the knee. One split, and that's fine, because that does account for the primary fracture at Frank 12 aft. But is it possible that there is some sort of rotational component? Because I want to ask whether or not you're looking at, in medicine, what's called a green stick fracture.
Oh, absolutely.
If you take a bone and twist it, it doesn't cleave, it fractures in a complicated spiral way.
The so-called green stick fracture is the way in which the keel broke away from the ship to account for how it's isolated from the rest of the wreck. That sometimes when structures fail, the last part to fail will stay connected to both ends.
Maybe we should take it over to the. You want to go? Yeah.
Grab your banana.
I beg your pardon? A little early in the party for that, don't you think?
Yes.
Right. So, yes, it actually works quite well.
This is one of our scientific analysis tools.
Yeah, it's pretty good, because look what happens when you rip through.
Well, banana turns out to be a great way to model the breakup of Titanic. So imagine that the bow is going underwater and the stern's being lifted up, and you've got a center of buoyancy right here. This is going to be so cool because it's going to break just like the ship. So it starts to break at the top. There's a buckling failure underneath, which you can see right there. It starts to tear down, right? So now the stern's falling back, the bow's sinking down, and as they separate, whoa, check that out. There's the double bottom separating from the stern and from the bow. All right, now the only thing that's missing, you've got to tear it, and this is how the bow separates and drops down like that. Now the stern's sitting at the surface with this big piece of double bottom. Stern now floods, goes vertical, heads for the bottom at high speed like this, and this big piece of windage here that's flapping in the breeze bends back, breaks off, and goes frisbeeing off across the debris field about a quarter of a mile away. Okay, let's rewind the clock to the early morning hours of April 15th, 1912. Go back to the moment just before Titanic broke in order to understand the escalation of forces that caused this massive failure in a structure that's designed to be unbreakable.
Basically, buoyancy is what determines if the ship floats or not. In Titanic's case, the stern maintained its positive buoyancy for a while and stayed on the surface. Then the bow became nothing but a dead weight that's got to go to the bottom of the ocean.
Once the bow had gone under and lifted the stern right out of the water, stresses not anticipated by the ship's designers wreaked havoc.
If this bow was hanging down like you say, it's lost. It's totally negative buoyancy.
Or very close to it. Probably has still some airspace at the top. But
which speaks to the buoyancy in the stern, because that thing is holding up.
That's what's holding it.
Thought
of as a complete system, it's still positively buoyant.
Yeah.
But there's this huge negative mass, pendulous mass, which breaks off at some point. Maybe at this angle, maybe at this angle. Maybe it hangs on for a second. Maybe it just, as it's achieving that angle, it's ripping away.
In order to test popularly held assumptions based on eyewitness accounts, I've commissioned a team of naval architects to apply a scientific method to Titanic's breakup to really separate myth from reality. But what about the flooding itself and how the rushing water brought the ship down? Did her stern really rise out of the water? It's a controversial shot in the movie. A gut-wrenching, big-screen moment based on survivor testimony. Is this really how it happened? If the breakup was Titanic's last breath, the iceberg strike was her death blow. It damaged 90 meters of her hull, allowing flooding in 5 of her 16 major watertight compartments. An injury that fatally crippled the ship. No one has ever actually seen the iceberg damage. It lies buried in the sediment underneath the ocean floor. But using the modern analytic tools of the shipbuilding industry, can we fill in some holes in our understanding of the flooding?
So Commander Stetler is going to start off. He's going to show us the sinking studies.
Yep. Let's turn to the flooding analysis to look for facts. We know some things about the initiation of the flooding, that it sideswiped an iceberg, that it opened the first 5 compartments. We have some outer boundaries that were set up by the testimony. We know it didn't take 3 days to sink. We know it took about 2 hours and 40 minutes. So there's certain things we know. They were able to create a model complex enough and accurate enough to be able to tell us certain things we didn't know before. How did the floodwater move through the ship? How did the bow so rapidly go negative? How did the stern rise? Let's turn to the naval architect's progressive flooding model to look for facts.
Part of the analysis that I was working on is a hydrostatics study. It involves tracking the flood water as it moves from the sea through the holes in the hull up and through all the compartments.
I have sliced the model up in a bunch of places, so you have hold number 1, hold number 2, hold number 3.
We haven't ever been able to track the compartment-to-compartment progression of floodwater before. It allows us to determine if the floodwater would have reached one part of a compartment or a different part of a compartment first. It allows us to much more accurately see at any intermediate stage of flooding how the ship is loaded and what the structural consequences of that are.
All right, so here we go. It's recalculating everything on 10-second intervals. So you can see there's a long period in here between, say, 25 minutes and 45 minutes or so before you get much flooding in other places.
Can you stop for 1 second? How's it getting to here? Is that Scotland Road?
This is Scotland Road, yeah.
Okay.
Scotland Road is the long passageway on the port side of the E-deck that travels the length of the ship. As Scotland Road flooded, it completely undermined the precaution of sealed compartments, like an accelerant acting as a shortcut for the floodwater over the top of the bulkheads.
There we go.
Because the starboard side on E-deck, so the starboard of Scotland Road, it is allowed to, in our model right now, flood earlier. It floods first.
To see it dissected in such a way and to see how the flooding progressed in a forensic way like that was almost like seeing Titanic sink for the first time.
Another accelerant was an open door on D-deck. Just one. Why would someone open a large door on the lower level of a rapidly sinking ship?
Second Officer Lightoller at one point sent a bosun by the name of Nichols to grab some men and go down and open one of the doors. And I think the idea was that since he wasn't loading the lifeboats full, that they would come back and take people off through the doorway or something. And he never saw the man again. And when they found the ship in 1985, there it is. The door is open.
The interesting thing about the D-deck shell door on the port side is that it communicates down a quarter all the way forward. You look at it here. Here's your door. If your water could come in here, it could come down and flood the entire forward D-deck. We should stop it at the peak of that stress curve because we know it didn't go past that. So that's your upper bound.
Okay, the peak of the stress curve is the moment we're after. It's just before the ship broke. When we reach this point, we'll know the final angle of the stern.
Yeah, it should be at 19 degrees at trim.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, the model shows us that the flooding caused a 19-degree maximum angle of tilt.
There's no subsequent force acting on the ship that would tend to break it that exists greater than that moment until it hits the bottom. And we know it broke before it hit the bottom. That might be our maximum tilt.
Yeah.
Not as much as we thought. Ken, you're going to have to repaint your paintings, buddy. I'm going to have to reshoot my movie.
Which one's easier?
I'll help you paint the paintings.
I think it's pretty amazing. I mean, this is completely new to me. That in the 2.5 hours it took Titanic to sink, she never capsized. We never really thought about that. It was staring us in the face. Ships capsized. We saw it recently with the Costa Concordia that sank off the coast of Italy. And when you look back at the history of all the other famous shipwrecks, they all roll over. Bismarck rolled over. Andrea Doria rolled over. The Titanic just went almost straight down. Yeah, toward the end it had maybe variously reported 6, maybe 8-degree list. That's not much. So that creates a whole new question. Were they trimming the ship? Were the engineers, none of whom survived, were they actually trimming the ship actively? Were they fighting that? Were they that good with their pumps by filling the trim tanks and seeing the ship was listing one direction, controlling it and trying to keep it upright so they could get those boats off? Or did they just get lucky? Was it the most amazing piece of luck in maritime history that they managed to successfully evacuate 700 some people in the boats while the ship just sat perfectly upright in the water? I've never thought of that before. Well, there's some questions we're just going to have to live with. But before I send these guys home, there's a game I like to play. What would you have done if you were captain of Titanic? Could more lives have been saved? Titanic set sail with more than 2,200 souls on board. But just over 700 would survive the disaster. Some went down with the ship. Most froze to death, floating in the frigid waters of the North Atlantic, waiting for a rescue ship. Even with only enough lifeboats for 50% of the passengers and crew on board,
crisis have been managed more effectively?
Can anyone hear me?
Let me pose a problem based on everything you guys know. Let's say I've got a time machine and I can teleport you back to Titanic 1 second after the ship has already hit the iceberg. You can do anything, but you've already hit the iceberg. So it's really an exercise in, could the crisis have been managed differently if they knew what we knew? How would you have saved everybody?
And, it's not meant as an indictment of the choices that were made by the captain and the officers. I think they were managing the problem about as well as humanly possible under the circumstances. But with what we know now, could we have done any better?
Like, how would you have saved everybody?
Save everybody, I think it was not possible. We can save much more. We can shift the number, that's for sure.
I think you could save everybody. I think you'd save everybody and their dog.
Really?
I think there's a couple ways to do it. There's 2 ways to do it that I can think of. There's a ship. There's a ship 6 to 8 miles away. Well observed by everybody. Mm-hmm. Right? It's there. You can see it.
It's thought to have been the British steamship Californian, within radio contact of the Titanic right before the accident.
One of the officers told people when they were getting in the boat to go row to that ship.
Captain Smith.
Mm-hmm. Captain Smith was telling people to row to the ship. Right? Why row to the ship? Why not drive your ship to that ship?
6 miles with a boat like that?
No, not that boat. That ship. Drive your ship to the other ship. And I would say even drive it backwards. You don't want to go too fast because you're damaged. You only got to go 6 miles. It's not very far.
No, but it's could be an hour or something like that.
Drive it backwards, it's going to tend to plane up slightly and not add to the flooding. You'd actually relieve the pressure and slow the flooding.
If I was
you think it's just pure head pressure?
Respectfully disagree.
Yeah, it's a big ship, and the holes are far underwater, and I think Jeff and I made the point in there. We disagree with that one.
You're going to evacuate some of them. Some are going to go in the water, and some are going to have to get picked up by the other ship. So that's your biggest problem is the transfer.
Driving the ship backwards, I was not in favor, but I had no objective reasons. It just seemed like the wrong thing to do to me.
My first favorite idea is to put everybody on the iceberg, because it's not sinking. Okay. Take a fur coat, sit on the iceberg.
If you have access to the iceberg.
Why don't you have access to it? You just ran into it.
You left it behind.
A couple 100 meters away. It was sitting right there.
If you have trouble convincing people to get into a lifeboat,
they didn't have any trouble when they got up to boat 13 and 15.
That was later.
Yeah.
That was later.
How are you going to put 2,000 people on an iceberg that is pretty irregular, and how in the hell are you going to get them on top? What I would do
is I'd be taking a chance on
well,
that.
Here's the option.
It's either that or cling to the stern, which is going down.
Option 2. They had received reports for days that there was field ice, and they knew they were within 5 miles of it. Field ice, pack ice.
Right.
Yeah, that you can easily walk right onto from any shell door.
Just drive the ship right into it.
I would have headed northwest until I hit the pack ice. Much easier than.
But I mean, you have to sail.
Yes.
Why you don't sail to the ship?
To the ship because of the transfer problem.
I would prefer to be on the ship.
Well, it's just
what if the ship turns out to be a 50-foot fishing sloop? How do you get 3,000 people on a 50-foot ship?
I don't think we came up with any super brilliant ways to solve it. There were a couple that might have worked if you were incredibly ballsy and just went for them.
You could have spent your time fashioning rafts.
That could be a possibility.
That is
the chair and stuff like that, but the people they will be a little bit in the water.
You could go tear the woodwork off the first class lounge.
You take a bunch of deck chairs and you made a raft out of it and survived, and that was it.
Yeah, but we can put more on them.
No, but that's one guy on his own initiative. If you had the crew concentrated on fashioning rafts from the carpenter stores, I think that
I don't see that happening. You might have saved another 50 people.
Some people have come up with the idea of gathering together a whole bunch of mattresses and lowering them over by ropes over the side, and they suck against the because they knew from the inside where the breaks, where the leaks were.
Ken had an interesting idea of putting mattresses down the side of the ship and trying to block the inrush of water into the boiler room 5 and boiler room 6. And I think as we argued it, there was some possibility that might have worked.
So our model indicates that if you just lower the permeability in the holds and forward spaces enough, that you would reach equilibrium and you would never go down, or it would take hours and hours and hours and hours. So take all the life jackets on board, just all of them, and shove them down in those 4 compartments. You would lower the permeabilities really low.
That's pretty scary.
Like a ping pong ball.
Yeah,
that's pretty scary.
But all you got to do is reduce like 20% of that total volume. That's a lot of volume.
How do you get them in? Because you could probably try to push them down.
You put them in before the flooding. I like that.
That is really cinematic. The risk of taking the life jackets off of all the passengers, saying we're going to do this instead.
Well, they can live or they can die in the water wearing life jackets.
Yeah.
Take away every life jacket from every man, woman, and child on the ship and put them all into one room. That might be piling your chips on one kind of, long shot. Now, based on what we've learned in this room, what did we get wrong in depicting the tragedy in the feature film?
All right, boys, like the captain said, nice and cheery, there's no panic. Wedding guns.
We never really took much of a beating for what we showed in the movie. There were people that disagreed with certain aspects of it because they had their own preconceptions of what it was like. It was generally broadly well accepted in the Titanic community. I think it's really more that we're just hard on ourselves. Based on what we know now, what did we screw up in the movie? We didn't screw it up. We were basing it on what we knew at the time.
Exactly.
So I think, of course, Ken could give us a list about 100 things long.
Are we just really nitpicking over physical things that we would do different with your sinking?
What you would consider nitpicking, what I would consider nitpicking are two different things. Your broad strokes are my nitpicks.
No, I'm talking about the sinking, the way you depicted the sinking. Okay, there's a mistake. There was a
broad strokes are very accurate.
One point during the sinking, there was a clear list where lifeboats were really scraping the side. They were trying to push with oars to even lower the boats, and that isn't depicted in the movie. So okay, that's something that could be changed if it were ever to be done.
Yeah, the next time I build a 1.5 million pound set and lower it 4 stories into a tank, I'll make sure I get that list on there.
Action! Boat 11, which is caught with the condenser discharge, is trying to row away while 13 is coming down almost on top of it, right behind that. And just about the time that 13 hits the water, 15 will be coming down on top of that. And the wash from that discharge washes 13 aft, right underneath 15. To the place where the passengers can reach up and touch the bottom of that 15 coming down, and they were panicked. They didn't know if they could hear them, but fortunately they were able to release the falls on 13 just in time to row out of the way, and then 15 came down right where 13 had been just moments before.
Can you hear me, Jim? They should be able to stand up and touch the bottom, and it shouldn't be really much lower than that.
Thanks for your opinion. I'm going to make it exciting.
What I told various interviewers during the marketing of the film was, I want this movie to be like you went back in a time machine and you actually were there for the sinking. That's how accurate I want it to be. Now, that didn't prove to be possible.
What about the colors of the rockets?
We talked about that at the time, and there was
the consensus was they were white.
Well, it wasn't a consensus. It was because nobody would have believed you if you'd had them burst into colored balls. That's my memory.
You think they were colored?
Because you asked me about that. We know they were now. But
they were white.
We had enough. They went up white,
says they weren't,
and they burst into colored balls.
White. All of them.
They went up white and burst into colored balls.
Yep.
Well, no, it wasn't a consensus. It was because nobody would have believed you if you had them. The only people who said they burst out into white balls were the officers. Can we put Parks' monitor up, please? Because this is something we did not know then that I now know. 2004, we found the box of rocket detonators.
Right.
And the interesting thing about this is it was a hole behind the brass cone of the detonator that was cut out to let you see the color of the balls that would come out of this white burst.
This is definitely bluer and greener, and this is definitely warmer, redder, obviously white. What a discovery.
That's pretty cool.
So
I wish we'd had that when we were making the movie. We would have made it look right.
And so apparently they were sending up rockets that did burst into colored balls the way people remembered.
He's got to go back and change everything he's ever written about the rockets. Kim's got to go back and redo every painting he's ever done, and I'd have to go back and redo the movie and change the colors of some of the rockets at least. Of course, what we all cling to is at least some of them are white. Well, how about the fact that all of your paintings and the movie show the elevation of the stern significantly higher than what we now know from this simulation? We now know the angle of the ship's too high. It's dramatic, looks cool. So it's not like there was this equipoise, this moment of it just sitting there, even though we protracted it in the film and that's the kind of romanticized image of it. In fact, it would have just accelerated through that angle until it finally did that. It's not vastly different than what we've showed, just a little less dramatic. And I think that, we're constantly trying to take into consideration what eyewitnesses saw and how dramatic it was to them, how it felt to them, and how they might have slightly exaggerated things later in the telling of the story, as almost everyone would do.
Bloody pull faster and pull!
But we weren't wrong in broad strokes. The ship broke at the surface. We know that. The bow plunged vertically. We know that. The stern hung around for a while. We know that. So the movie was true in its broad strokes. So I didn't feel after the film that I had, that I had a lot to defend. I felt like we had done good work at the time, but it was limited. There was still so much more that the wreck site could teach us, which is why I personally went back out there on 2 successive expeditions. My decision has been to not change anything in the movie, because once you start that process, where do you stop? And the things that are wrong are things that would only bother 8 people in the world. Myself being one of them, but I can live with it. Even though I'm not going to change the movie, I do get to redo the animation of the sinking. It's going to be very cool. The most accurate depiction ever of what happened that night 100 years ago. We've beat it up. We've disagreed. But we've found a lot of consensus. We've advanced our knowledge of Titanic's final moments and have plugged what we've learned into an updated visual record. The final word on the disaster in animation. All right.
So this is the last thing I asked QuickTime that you would...
Now, did you notice that in Stetler's paper, he said that the final trim angle before the break was 23 degrees, not 19? Yes. Since the conclusion of our investigation, Commander Stetler revised his results and published 23 degrees, maximum angle of tilt. If our 2.5-year engineering study shows 23 degrees, we should show 23 degrees.
Okay.
That's the number that he settled on, right?
It's 2 degrees off right now. That's an easy fix.
We've been arguing over the number of degrees for about 15 years now. Let's make it 23 degrees.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm happy to do it. Yeah.
All right, let's put this to bed.
There we go.
All right, that looks good. Ship's veering to port, 22 knots. Sideswipes the iceberg. Murdoch ports around the iceberg, try to keep from hitting the propellers. That looks pretty good. Okay, so now we're watching in accelerated time We see the first 5 compartments flood. They equalize pretty quickly. Valves pulled down. We see the port list. Port list looks right now. It's like about 9 degrees. Well, you can really see the effect of that list on the flooding. So yeah, superstructure starts to get pulled under. Funnels collapse at their base. Now the bow is accelerating downward. That looks good. We're starting to see the stern come up. We got our maximum peak stress, and yeah, boom, brakes. Okay, bow swinging down. That was good. The double keel hang on. Then they separate. Bow plunges straight down. All right, we got mass snapping back. The funnels are ripping backward, pulling off all the davits. Bow's going down like a torpedo. Here's the angle when it pulls through into a stable position. Let's see the start. Peeling way over to port. That looks right. And she goes, yep, that's right. She goes almost vertical just when she goes under, and then boom, implodes. Now she accelerates, and all the stuff starts to rip off. See the shell plating going. There goes the double bottom frisbeeing off. And the stern's falling through. So now the stern's falling aft end down. And we see the spiraling. Here comes the bow. Bow's falling in a stable position, and it hits. Yeah, boom. It kind of breaks its back. And we see the hydraulic outburst with a downblast effect. Let's see the start. We see the shell plating blown off, decks, everything kind of settled. Looks like a big airplane crash site. Bada bing, bada boom. That's exactly what we're looking for. And action! I've been working on Titanic for nearly 20 years. I planned this investigation to be my final word. It's time for me to pass the baton and move on to some new challenges. But I'll never stop thinking about Titanic. For me, it's so much more than simply an exercise in forensic archaeology. Part of the Titanic parable is of arrogance, of hubris, of the sense that we're too big to fail. Well, where have we heard that one before? There was this big machine, this human system that was pushing forward with so much momentum that it couldn't turn, it couldn't stop in time to avert a disaster. And that's what we have right now. Within that human system on board that ship, if you want to make it a microcosm for the world, you have different classes. You know, you've got first class, second class, third class. Well, in our world right now, you've got developed nations and undeveloped nations. You've got the starving millions who are going to be the ones most affected by the next iceberg that we hit, which is going to be climate change. We can see that iceberg ahead of us right now, but we can't turn. We can't turn because of the momentum of the system. Political momentum, business momentum. There are too many people making money out of the system the way the system works right now. And those people, frankly have their hands on the levers of power and aren't ready to let them go. Until they do, we're not going to be able to turn to miss that iceberg, and we're going to hit it. When we hit it, the rich are still going to be able to get their access to food, to arable land, to water, and so on. It's going to be the poor, it's going to be the steerage that are going to be impacted, and it was the same with Titanic. And I think that's why this story will always fascinate people, because it's a perfect little encapsulation of the world and all social spectra. But until our lives are really put at risk, the moment of truth, we don't know what we would do. And that's my final word.
Yes,
Titanic 100 continues with Bob Ballard's impassioned plea to save the Titanic wreck. Brand new